No introduction needed. I'm Supr, and today on the Never Ending Siege series, we are going to rank the EUL teams for at least stage 1 of the EUL season, which I'm not sure if there is an announcement in terms of when it starts yet. But most likely it will start sometime this month in March. So looking at the EUL teams, obviously right now Vitality, they're not Vitality anymore. They're technically orgless at the moment. I assume they'll get an org before the league starts. Maybe that's why there's not a date yet in terms of when it's actually going to start. But we do know all the rosters, and these are going to be the 10 rosters competing in stage 1. So first, let's talk about the changes. Obviously, with BDS, they're running the same 5 out: Shaiko, Alims, Renshiro, Rafal, and Brid. They're just very dominant in Europe. There's nothing else that needs to be said. Obviously, at Invitational, BDS kind of flamed out. Something happened with Rafal, which I don't think we've ever received clarity on. But this placing here is not the true BDS. They're definitely a much better team than this. So unless whatever happened to them at Invite and like the emotional, I guess, distress it caused the team carries over to EUL, obviously BDS is going to be a very strong team. And then looking at G2 of all the teams, probably winner are them and Empire, and we'll talk about Empire in a little bit. G2 obviously went through the most roster changes, so they retained Citizen and Virtue from their former roster, which, as you see, was 4 and 5 overall, 7 out of 10 placings, which, as we know, just for G2, the organization, they are an organization that, you know, we do talk about the pressure to win and the org putting pressure on you to win and that kind of thing. This is an org where your team should be good if you are on G2. So, you know, finishing 7th place, being 4 and 5, that's not good enough. So what do? They bring arguably the best player in Brazil to Europe, Alamau, from Team 1. Now, at Invitational, Team 1 also flamed out, but Alamau himself performed pretty well. And just in general, and we could look at this real quick too, and all of these stats that I'm going to show you are easily available for you on PGG, of course, assuming it loads. And as we see here, Alamau is the 3rd highest rated player in Brazil over the past year. Really the 2nd highest rated because BLK's only played 9 maps. Plus 133 overall, 1.16 rating, plus 18. And I would say he's kind of a flex on both sides, really. His main operator is listed as defense, but he'll play Mozzie. He's kind of a flex. He does it all, and I believe that's what he's going to play for G2. And for those of you who are unaware, he does speak English pretty well. So it's definitely going to be an adjustment for him because no matter how good he is as a player, he is somebody who is moving from Brazil to Germany to play in a completely different league. The way teams play in EU are completely different. The players he's playing with and against are completely different. The language is completely different. It's obviously a huge adjustment for him, but just in terms of pure player, I mean, he immediately becomes one of the best, if not the best player in the entire league for EUL. So this is going to be super interesting. And then also, they happen to just take another player who was the best player on his team, and they're going to take Doki, who was the main fragger really for NaVi, and plug him into the G2 roster. Doki and Citizen also teamed together in the past when Citizen won Pro League, although I think Doki was banned during that period, so technically Doki did not win. But again, if we were to go to EU and we look at Doki actually has the same exact rating as Alamau does within his region, plus 60 overall, plus 28 entry. And he's, as you see, more of a fragger, although I would say he's not necessarily an entry. But, I mean, just straight away, obviously, you're bringing in two huge, like, star-type players to the team. And you're weakening one of the other teams in the league. NaVi, who obviously last stage were not very good anyway, but they took arguably their best player, so it's hard to see them improving off of that. And NaVi at Invitational placed in the 13 to 16 range. So, again, just G2 kind of trying to build a super team in a way. And then they also bring Prano over from Rogue. So that's another team that they're potentially weakening in their own league. Rogue obviously finished 4th in stage 3 of EUL. And then Rogue was also 13 through 16 at Invitationals. So obviously one of the 20 best teams in the world. And Prano is not going to be as statistically, I guess, impressive as Alamau and Doki, but he's sporting a 0.94 rating, 19 plants, playing Thermite Smoke, a pretty solid cost. So he's clearly going to the team in a support IGL role, and at least statistically, he seems like he's doing a pretty solid job. At least in the the kind of kills and cost department. So I obviously the G2 roster look extremely strong. We don't know, if you look at them, all different countries besides Citizen and Doki, people who've never played before, people from entire different countries or continents playing for the first time. So there are things that could certainly go wrong, as well as like the growing pain of figuring out how people are going to play around each other. Because I do think if you look at this team, I don't think they have a true entry player. I think Doki is going to try to play that entry role, but I kind of think he plays a little more like Citizen and more of a I forgot to turn off my sub alerts, but Prod, thank you for the 17 months. But yeah, I think there might be some growing pains. I think they have to figure out roles. I don't think they have a true entry player. I could even see Alamau ending up kind of taking that. But obviously G2 just have an extremely strong roster. And then going to Heroic, this is the former Kavana team, which, as we know, Kavana finished 6th place last stage. And they were very close to qualifying for Invite. And I believe they just... If I remember correctly, I'm pretty sure they just choked. Not only qualifying for Invite, but then they also lost, or through points, but then they also lost the qualifier finals. So they kind of choked again. So this is a team that honestly has potentially shown that like pressure moments maybe get to them a little bit. And they've made a roster change as well. And if we go and look at stage 3 for them, he really made a lot of roster changes now that I'm looking at it. Kavana, I believe they replaced, was it Antarctic? Yeah, they replaced Antarctic, who was their lowest performing player, although keep in mind, he was their hard support player as far as roles go. And he even had the second highest cost on his team while being negative 35. So that means he's sort of doing his job. And they brought in Uno, obviously the former G2 player, who is definitely not a support player, right? Uno is not a support player. So I always have a little hesitance in terms of just replacing one player with another player who doesn't play that role, and then assuming, I guess they're going to assume that maybe Grizzly, because he's playing Ace, can slot into that, or Uno's going to play that. I just feel like that's obviously risky. You're assuming that Uno can fill into this role when, as far as I know, I don't think Uno has even played comp. And yeah, Uno at this point has not played a Pro League match since when did he even play last? Yeah, I mean, he didn't play stage 2 of 2021. Did he play stage 1? Yeah, I mean, Uno has not played a competitive game since stage 1 of 2021. So not only did he take a very long competitive break, which is always extremely risky, he's also going into a new role. Or a role that I would say isn't necessarily the most natural to him. So we'll see in terms of Heroic. Obviously, they're a team that's pretty consistent, I think, in the region, but I think the roster change for them is a little up in the air. And then we have Vitality, or LFO. Looks like they made a roster change as well. So I believe that they have dropped Cactus, who, again, I guess EU just hates support players. They dropped a player who only went -3 while going +6 on entry and 5 plants with a 0.98 rating. And they brought in, I'm not sure how to pronounce his name, Mowgli, who, if you see here, is, again, complete opposite player. He's a fragger. Did have extremely good stats in CL, +45 overall, +17 entry. I mean, obviously, he was a dangerous man in CL, but you're going back to a situation where you're seemingly replacing a support player with a fragger and hoping it works out. Besides that, Vitality's roster is the same. They've had, the core of that team for a long time. And even if we look at the standings for last year, Vitality finished 3rd in stage 3. They were 6-3. So I think they didn't have the results they wanted at majors, but this is a strong roster. They didn't qualify for Invitational, but within their region, they were tied with G2 for 4th overall. So this is a team that, they do have a good roster. And then NaVi, and this is where it starts to get a little kind of scary. So NaVi made several changes. They lost Doki, who, if we look at stage 3 stats, he's the only player on their team who's positive. +7 on entry. And then they also, I believe, they also dropped Saves, who was their 2nd top frag, and the only other player on their team who was positive in entry. So seemingly they lost their top 2 fraggers, kept their support players, and I guess their flex. And then they're bringing in Kayak and Thunder. And if we look at Kayak, obviously he was on G2. And I think he's naturally a support player, but he was seemingly playing more flex and really struggling on the flex. -30 overall, -9 entry, only 2 plants, only 80% survival rate. So they're bringing him in to replace, I guess, Saves. And then they're also bringing in Thunder, who I think is a CL player for EU. I'm honestly not even sure who Thunder is. We might just have to search him. Thunder. Okay, last. He was on Heroic in Pro League. Oh, okay. Yeah, that shows you how much I watched Heroic, who I pretty sure were auto relegated. And he was negative 16, also on support. So NaVi kind of have 4 support players and then Blur. I'm really interested to see who's going to be playing entry or second entry or anything besides support for them. Because looking at their roster, they have 4 support players. And then looking at Rogue, they dropped Aces. And then Prano, who I believe was their support IGL, left the team. We go take a look at Rogue. For stage 3 at least, Aces was by far, really, their best performing player. And as far as I know, I believe he was dropped for not performance related issues. And then we have Prano, who left the team to join G2. And he was negative 18, but he had 17 plants, 70% cost, and he's the IGL of the team. So seemingly 2 big losses. And if we look at just the overall standings, Rogue were 4th in stage 3. And then they also finished top 16 at Invite. And then to replace them, Rogue brought in Kanto and Deepak. So Deepak is a CL player who last stage, I believe, where are they? Was on Gamma, where he went negative 6 with a 50% cost. They didn't even make CL playoffs, playing a flex role. And then Kanto, who we all know who Kanto is, but the last game that Kanto played was Invitational in May, where I think he actually performed like not insanely awful. Yeah, I mean he didn't exactly just get like absolutely shit on or anything, but that was the last time he played. So you're probably safe to assume that Kanto might be okay, like he might be solid, but he's probably not going to perform up to Ace's level. And then Deepak is not going to be up to Prano's level. And then from what I've heard, I believe Leon is also switching over to more of like a support IGL role, which, if you know how Leon plays, I feel like is I feel like it's going to be interesting because Leon is quite aggressive and does a lot of kind of random stuff, right? So this team to me is another question mark. And then we have Empire, who, I mean, if you pay attention to Siege competitive stuff in the offseason at all, we all know what's happened with Empire. Second place Invitational, second place EU, second place EU Finals. Drops 4/5 of their team. And they keep Scyther, and Scyther is certainly not a bad player. Right? Scyther is a good player. And then I believe they replace the other 4 players with the CL roster of Hellraisers, I believe. Emission, Andreezy, Exodus, and WTG. So a couple of them. So Emission plus 50 in CL, plus 9 overall entry. Exodus plus 4, -2 entry. And then they're also bringing in WTG, who's on Virtus Pro. And who am I missing? So if we look at Virtus Pro, WTG, -2. This is going to be the support player, obviously, playing kind of the hard breach. And then Andreezy. Did I just miss him? Also on Virtus Pro, yeah. Maybe I'm just blind. Or not. He played CL. We got to find him then. He was an analyst. Okay, so they picked up an analyst to replace Joystick. Perfect. Honestly, I don't feel like Empire is going to be the worst, but clearly, I mean, they're not going to be the Empire of old. It's I think they're going to be okay, but just certainly, like, the whole roster situation is just so weird because they clearly just knew they were downgrading, did it anyway for whatever reason. And then we have Virtus Pro, who also made roster changes. So far, every single team here has made a roster change besides BDS. And BDS, in my opinion, are, regardless of what happened at Invite and the emotional, like, shit they had to go through with Rafal kind of getting screwed over, they didn't make a roster change, and they're still going to be the best team in EU. So for Virtus Pro, looks like they're going to lose Karzeka, they lose WTG, and then they keep Pasha, Rask, and Milan, and then they bring in Smash by Ash, who we saw here was +6, +8. So CL Fragger and FMX, who I think was also playing CL. Or maybe just didn't even qualify for it. So not well enough, I guess. So kind of an unknown there, at least. But really, probably a downgrade. If anything, I don't think it's like an improvement, right? It's probably on par with what they've been running, which if we look, they were 7th overall last year, and then stage 3, Virtus Pro was 5th overall. They were 5-4. Okay. And then we have MNEB Gaming, which is the newest team to EUL and the winners of Challenger League, and they kept the same 5. And at Invitational, we know they placed top 16, same as NaVi and Rogue, and they kept the same roster. And in EUCL, I feel like they were pretty dominant. I think they're at, like, obviously they have a players +70, +27, +25, and they're keeping the same team. So I feel like they're a team that I think they're going to be pretty strong coming in from Challenger League. Obviously, not all these guys have. I think even only Nello does, actually. They don't have a lot of Pro League experience on their team, and it's possible maybe 1 or 2 of them, I guess the way you'd say it, are overmatched. Right. So we'll see how that goes for them in Pro League. But I think initially, I think M&M are definitely looking like very solid. Even if they didn't necessarily light the world on fire at Invite, you know, they were technically coming from CL and didn't finish in the bottom, which is accomplished in itself. And then finally, we have Team Secret. Team Secret was the team that won the relegation match in the EU last stage, or last year, and finished 9th overall. And they kept the same roster. So I know Team Secret kind of changed a lot over the course of the year to try to get better. So I'm curious with this roster if they thought that means that they're like on the right track. But I think that's very interesting to basically be a relegation roster, because they did have this team for stage 3 last year and they still finished 2-7. So even with this roster, they were still 2-7. So they just kept the same team. And that's pretty interesting to me. I don't know that I have a lot of faith in them. They didn't have one player go positive. Slevin was the closest at +0. 57% cost, +1 entry. And so now that we've kind of broke down the roster changes, let's, I think, slot in what to me is going to be the easiest. So the easiest is going to be BDS at number 1. BDS were 21-6 all of last year. They won EU by 15 points. And the EU finals against Empire, who got second place at Invitational, they completely wiped the floor with them. Now, keep in mind, EUL is played online. EU finals are played online. The old Empire roster is traditionally a better LAN team than online team because of where they play from. But if you look at the score of this game, it was literally 7-3, 7-0, 7-2. This was not even a close game. They kept the same roster. Brit is, in my opinion, definitely the best support player in the world. Arguably in contention for just the best player in the world. Shaiko as well, arguably one of the best players in the world. Alim's also very good. Renshiro very good. Rafal's kind of like that glue guy for them. They just have all 5 players on BDS are really good. They kept the same team. They've been dominating EU. Unless, like I said, unless something has happened to them after Invitational where, the emotional shit that they went through at Invitational carries over, I don't see them letting up this number 1 spot. And now I don't know if this is controversial, but I think, to me, looking at everything we just saw, the most obvious is that G2 are going to get second. Even if they have growing pains, even if they're trying to figure out their roles and their roster, the second best team in their region weakened themselves clearly, like big time weakened themselves, right? And then if we go to Invite, and outside of Empire, where's EU? NaVi, Rogue, roster change. BDS, we know what happened. MNEB. And the gap in EU as well, if you look from BDS to these teams, put it this way, G2 last year was seen as not very good. They still finished 4th overall in the region. Now they brought in arguably the best player from a region. We've already talked about Doki, who is one of the best players in this region, and Prano, who I think most people consider to be a solid support player, IGL type. So just based off of talent, I think you have to assume they get second. Obviously, something could go wrong. They could have weird roles. Something could, it's not a guarantee, but I'm just looking at this team. I'm looking at the fact that every other single team virtually made roster changes. And I think G2 gets second. And so now we're going to talk third. And I'm going to put MNEB third. MNEB, if we look at Invitational, they finished top 16. That was the first LAN for 4 of them. And the teams that they placed with from their own region both made roster changes, and I would say both of these teams downgraded as well. MNEB kept the same team. I think they have a pretty good idea of how to play. They're used to playing best of ones. They're not going to have any issue there. And, you know, winning EUCL, I think they're a pretty solid online team. And I like that, you know, one thing that's always underrated is chemistry and sticking together and working on your problems. Teams that change rosters all the time, they're constantly trying to catch up. Because if you make a change heading into this stage, you have to worry about 3 new maps, attacker repick, and then your new players. So not only do you have to learn technically the 3 new maps, you then have to learn the other 6 maps with your new players while also learning attacker repick. Right? It's a lot to go through, and all of these teams seemingly shot themselves in the foot, right? So I think MNEB, I think these 3, I feel pretty confident about being top 3. Now, this is where it gets tricky to me, because for 4th, I think I'm between Vitality, the former Vitality roster, who have the same team besides Mowgli, who they brought in to replace their own support player, Cactus, and the Kavana roster, who dropped their lowest performing player, although keep in mind he is the hard support player, and they brought in Uno, who is an upgrade there. But to me, both of these teams made roster changes where even if Mowgli is a better player than Cactus, he's a fragger and he's replacing a support player. And Uno, who's probably a better player in Anarchic, he's replacing a support player, and I wouldn't say Uno is necessarily naturally a support player. So I think I'm going to go Vitality 4th. I think they're I like that they kept their core. The fragger that they brought in from CL, I'm pretty sure if we were to look at this, yeah, he's plus 42, plus 17. He certainly put up some numbers, averaging over a kill a round in CL. I think I like what they already are, whereas with Kavana, I feel like it's hard to necessarily trust Kavana. Or I guess now they're heroic. Because, so let's just go look at EU, right? For 2021. Okay, so stage 1, Kavana, they placed 3rd. That's heroic roster, right? They placed 3rd. Stage 2, they placed 7th. Stage 3, they placed 6th. During this, Vitality placed 3rd, 5th, and 7th. So they're not far off. But with Vitality, they were slowly improving their placings, right? They went 7th to 5th to 3rd. Kavana didn't really... They didn't really show improvement, and if anything, they kind of choked a lot of the time when it came down to it. I think they had an opportunity to qualify for Invitational twice based off of points and based off of winning the EUCL quals, and they could not do either of them. So I feel confident with this top 4. And so I'm looking at this, and I just have to get it out of the way. I think NaVi get last place here. I know they finished 3rd overall, stage 3. I know they finished top 16 at Invite. But stage 3, they were finished 8 out of 10 places, right? And then they just lost their best player who joined G2, Joki, and they dropped their, arguably, I don't know if I'd say he's their second best player, but their second top frag. And to replace him, to replace these two players, they brought in Kayak, who is naturally a support player, I think, who struggled playing not on a support role. And then they brought in another support player. So they dropped their two highest fraggers and brought in two more support players. So I feel like NaVi are the worst right now. And then, unfortunately, I think we put Secret ninth. I feel like Secret think they're improving, and maybe they are. But the simple truth is, even with this roster, this is the same roster that played Stage 3 and won their relegation match. They were last place with this same roster. They were 2-7. And then in their relegation match, they won 3-2 maps. So they were barely better than the CL team. And they didn't change anything. So I feel like these are the bottom two. So now we get to Empire, Heroic, Rogue, and Virtus Pro. And if I'm looking at this, I think we just slot in Heroic at 5th. You know, I think it was kind of between, at least for me, it was between those two for top for the 4th spot. So I think I like them at 5th. Within their region, as we saw, they're kind of constantly in that 3rd to 7th range, 3rd to 6th range. I think Uno replacing Anarchic on just a player basis. I think that's going to be an improvement. It's not naturally a role fit, but it's a better player. So I think 5th is okay with them, and I wouldn't be surprised if they manage to get 4th. So now we have Empire, Rogue, and Virtus Pro. Rogue lost their support and IGL, and they lost their top fragger, who I think a lot of people probably would say Aces was their best player, right? And then let's look at Rogue last year. Stage 1, they finished 8th. Stage 2, they finished 10th. Or sorry, I don't know what that was. Stage 1, they finished 4th. Then stage 2, they finished last. And then stage 3, they finished 4th again. At Invitational, they finished top 16. And if we look at what they lost Aces and Prano, and they brought in Kanto and Deepak from Challenger League. So I think I'm going to slot them in at 8th. They're moving Leon, and this is something else that I think is like somewhat interesting, where if we look at tier 1 and just look at overall entry kills, right? So Leon was negative 41, but if we, not even counting his like positive negative stats, look at the amount of entry engagements Leon gets into. He gets into a lot of entry engagements. And supposedly now he is moving to a support IGL role for a player who's just naturally aggressive. I feel like I don't necessarily like that. And if they kind of see Leon as like a playmaker for their team, which is something that I would probably say that I see Leon as, he's sort of a playmaker for Rogue. I don't love the role change. And if we're just being honest, I'll say this, and maybe this is a hot take. I don't even think Kanto is going to do bad. I think Kanto may do bad if their team is like very bad, because obviously typically the majority of time, if your team is bad, statistically, you probably have bad stats. That's just, 1 + 1 = 2. But I don't think that Kanto is like washed or anything. If you look at Kanto, if we look at Kanto, 6 invitationals. So this is the last time Kanto played, 2021. This is an invitational, so this is against literally the best players in the world. It was -3, +3 on entry. EUL stage 1, -12, -7, but he's playing Hibana. That's not a role that I think I would want Kanto in usually. And obviously he struggled there. EUL 2020 finals, and you know, this is going back pretty far now. -2. Not getting shit on. So I don't think he's not going to be Kanto of old, who was arguably the best player in the world at one point, right? But I don't think Kanto is going to be like... There's a bad stigma around players coming back because of the NVK situation, I think. But, one, Kanto has always been better than NVK. I mean, sorry, NVK fans. Kanto has just always been better than NVK. From a mechanical standpoint, from just a standpoint of understanding generally how to play the game, Kanto has always been a better player than NVK. And Kanto's not washed to that level, in my opinion. So I think Kanto, while he's not going to be Kanto of old, I don't think he's going to be a complete disaster. But I still think he's a downgrade from Aces. Aces is a better player than Kanto at this point, right? So I think 8th is comfortable for them. And now, I believe it's the 2 Russian mixed teams of Empire and Virtus Pro. And to me, these are the 2 hardest to gauge because obviously Empire kept Scyther, who's... I mean, Scyther's a very good player for sure. You know, he's been an event. He's on, you know... I mean, this is a guy who's... Just in the past year, he finished runner-up twice in majors, right? He's won a major. He's certainly not a bad player. And then they're kind of putting him with a bunch of inexperienced CL players. And then we have Virtus Pro, who... They're also bringing in 2 new players, but for the core of their team, they kept the majority of their team, right? So Virtus Pro, I still believe they have Milan, Rask, and Pasha. And I think they got rid of the bottom guys, as far as I know. So using just that general idea that they... One, I think the players coming into Empire are going to have pressure on them just because of the situation. The players on that team are not oblivious to the fact of what's happened, basically. That they really should not be on the team. That doesn't mean that they shouldn't be in Pro League. That doesn't mean they're not deserving or whatever, right? But they're stepping into like a legendary team. I mean, I think Empire's roster literally won Team of the Year in the CGG Awards that just came out. They're stepping into a legendary roster, so I think there's pressure there. And then they haven't played in Pro League before. And I think we count the fact that typically the Russian players online don't perform as well. At least that's the case of Old Empire. I've always felt like they have like some, maybe just based off of EU servers or something, I just feel like they're not as good online. And so I think we put Virtus Pro 6. And I think Virtus Pro, if Virtus Pro, if we flip this, right, and Virtus Pro ended up in like 4th or 3rd, it wouldn't shock me. Because they kept the core of their team, and, I mean, stats are stats. You know how I feel about stats. I literally have a video on it. But, seemingly, they kept their 3 best players and then tried to improve on the bottom, and they kept the core of their team. So, just based off that fact and the consistency from at least having the same core, I think we put them over Empire. And the 2 guys they picked up, if they are an improvement, not only, like, statistically, but just the fit within the team... I think Virtus Pro could be fighting in these areas, right? So I think this is what I'll go with. The hardest for me is this area. And Benja, this is going to be posted to YouTube after this. So, and if you're watching this on YouTube and think that was really weird, I'm recording this on Twitch. So it's like Inception in a way. But I think these four, I feel like could place anywhere here. I kind of feel like these two are there and these two are here. It's kind of weird, obviously, because these were two teams that were just at Invitational, but I feel like they're Empire. I mean, Empire could be great. We don't know. Obviously, they have 4 roster changes, but I feel comfortable with like this grouping. BDS is by themselves, and I would even put a gap here, and I would say G2 is closer to this, right? I feel confident with like this. I think BDS are first for sure. I feel confident with this. I think 2 of these 4 place top 4. These 2 place top 2. And the rest of these guys, I mean, really, I think these 2 are fighting for this, and these 2 are fighting for first and last. But if I had to just pick right now, I think I'd do that. Although, I think these 3 are the closest. Because seemingly for Virtus Pro, or sorry, not for Virtus, Vitality, who they're no longer Vitality. We don't know who they're going to be. For Vitality and Heroic, they seemingly picked up players who are better than the player they replaced, but it's not a natural role fit. And I think in both instances, they replaced their support player. I'm not sure about their IGL, but going into like 9 maps now, so 3 new maps and attacker repick, it could be a little bit of a process to kind of adjust to new support or new IGLing, whatever it may be. But if both these roster changes are really strong, Virtus Pro included, really, I think you could maybe do something like that, right? Because I'm putting MNEB up here based off the fact that they have consistency with their roster. They seemingly are on a track where they keep improving. They seem like they're a good online team and a good best of 1 team. So I like all of the consistency that they already have built in with them. And these 3 teams, 4, 5, and 6, are the unknowns. Because if their roster changes did improve their team, they could pass them, or they could just be fighting each other. So that's going to be it. I'm going to stick with this for now. We'll see how wrong or right I am after stage 1 of EUL. If you enjoyed this video, sub, like, and leave a comment and let me know what video you want me to do next. See you later.